But yeah, I mean, I love going on Who Sampled Now because you hear a sample and you've heard it before. You can't place your finger on it. Drives you nuts. Thank God there's a website that offers that information up.
Is Who Sample snitching though?
That's a good point. Because I know that there are a lot of producers who don't clear them, and as a result, they're going to get caught. But it could be. What do you think?
Let's get it started.
Double O.
Think like a rapper.
Check 1 2, mic check 1 2. This is your host Double O, and you are tuned in to episode 104 of the Think Like a Rapper podcast. I hope you're doing well out here in these coronavirus streets. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Rich Person's Dap, or the finger guns pointed at you from 5 feet away when you say what's up to somebody who is across the line of fame. But I think that this might be the opportune time to do those things to family, friends, and whoever else, because, yeah, it's getting crazy out here. Switching gears a little bit, this week it is not about the coronavirus, although we did talk about it off mic because we knew there were impending implications for the live music industry. My guest this week is Z. He is co-founder, editor-in-chief of DJ Booth, co-founder of AudioMac, the streaming service, and his stewardship at DJ Booth has always been extremely intriguing to me because as the blog era has long faded, DJ Booth still is this extremely powerful place where hip-hop journalism and long form and deep dives occur. And so we talk about the pivot from what DJ Booth originally was into what it has become now. But more specifically, I actually wanted to talk about his Twitter persona and how he uses that to be informative for artists, but it sometimes gets him in hot water, like it did this week when he told young artists, because of Megan Thee Stallion's bad contract, to simply get a lawyer. Let's dig in, find out his reasoning behind it, and how we can be more productive in our conversations with young artists as they're entering in the industry. Think like a rapper. Z, Brian Zisook.
What's going on? It's Double O. This is episode 104. I've realized that if I started with ones because I wanted to be educational. And now I'm like, wait a minute, I haven't done 100 podcasts, so that's
a lot of podcasts.
I have no clue what I'm going to do. But I am here with Brian Zisook from AudioMac, DJ Booth.
It's enough right there.
And angry Twitter.
Yeah.
Eggs currently. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making the time, actually.
No, thank you for having me.
Last minute.
Well, I mean, it was fortuitous, both in town at the same time, so.
Yeah, and we will definitely get into why I wanted to hit you, because I felt like it was something to talk about. But you are steeped very much in the culture, and I wanted to kind of start. Most people obviously know and follow DJ Booth.
Right.
It's probably, I'm sure there's a ton of users of AudioMac, but they may not know why. And so I kind of wanted to start with, like, what are your first memories of hip hop where you were like, this is a thing that I want to be a part of?
It's a great question. So I grew up in a family that was music first. We watched television in the house, but music was always playing. And I fell in love with music first, not any particular genre specifically. I grew up listening to a lot of Motown, Four Tops, Temptations, Aretha Franklin, Jackson 5. My parents both had vinyl collections. So I don't know why they let me, but they let me go through and get my dirty fingerprints all over their vinyl. I'd play 45s and I would just crate dig. And I, over time, was able to find a lot of music that I fell in love with and led me down a rabbit hole from soul and Motown and classic R&B to modern R&B and hip hop. And they never shackled me. They never told me what I couldn't listen to in the house, unlike a lot of friends whose parents said no to rap music, like point blank, period.
So you entered in from the reverse. You were listening to essentially the samples, and then that led you to connecting the dots into what you heard in hip hop?
Yes.
Was there a song where you were like, I know what this is from, or like, I know what this is?
I'm sure there were countless times. I can't think of anything off the top of my head explicitly. But yeah, I mean, I love going on Who Sampled Now because you hear a sample and you know you've heard it before. You can't place your finger on it. Drives you nuts. Thank God there's a website that offers that information up.
Is Who Sampled snitching though?
That's a good point because I know that there are a lot of producers who don't clear them, and as a result, they're going to get caught. But it could be. What do you think?
I've had
You're a producer.
I've had an issue with them before.
Okay.
They accredited a sample to a song that was not a sample.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a. There's a.
There's a replay?
No, not at all. I used to. Still use, but used to use Reason.
Okay.
I probably heard of Reason a lot, and they early on knew probably what was going to happen now before the splice and all those things of the world existed.
Right.
So they used to have remade drum breaks that came with Reason that were just kind of like,
stock.
these are the famous things. So let's play around with these sonics.
Right.
Right. And make drum breaks that are the sonics, but aren't the drum breaks. And so I'd used one of those for a song, but I guess in however Who Sampled sort of finds them, they attributed it to a song that it wasn't. And then but to be fair, they were really good about removing it pretty quickly because I was like, I can't run into, I've been sued for a song that was never released. So I could not play with.
What grounds did they have for that?
It was white labeled illegally. So we had a record called Clothes, Hose, and Liquor, Kids in the Hall. And it was, Just Blaze decided to play it on Sirius, just as like he was in the mix and he wanted to play the record.
Okay.
Some European company decided that they wanted to white label from the...
They pressed it up on vinyl?
Yeah, from the...
Oh my God.
From the mix that he did. And then we got served in Missoula, Montana. They found us.
What ended up happening?
I'm not sure. I was only partially
Was ducked
liable.
down the primary?
No, it was actually, this was Raucous.
Okay.
So they sued Raucous. They sued Knowledge. I guess I didn't get sued because I had produced the record, but this was on a Knowledge. It was considered a Knowledge song at the time, even though it was basically a Kids in the Hall song. And so, yeah, the funniest thing was we had a awesome tour manager. She was, a small white lady from Detroit. And we're at sound check in, again, Missoula, Montana. And they're like, there's a white lady at the door for you, Knowledge. And he's like, oh, okay, it's
Montana.
It's weird, but it's weird that you would say that about our tour manager since clearly she's prepped everything, but whatever, right. I'll go and say what's up to Jamie. And goes and talks, and the lady just is right there. It's like, so the funniest thing she said is, oh, sorry, because I want to come to the show later, but I have to serve you right now.
You're like, thanks, would you like to stay?
Yeah, no, it was hilarious. But so I was very cognizant of like when Who Sampled comes out. To be fair, I use it as a resource. It's right. Not that it's something I don't, but I know that at the end of the day, it is basically just it's snitching. But continue. So you're a fan of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of knowledge, right? Not your former partner in rhyme, but yeah, I mean, I used to be able to do a lot more deep dive Googling back when I had more free time, something I don't have much of anymore.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, part of the mission of DJ Booth, as it has been for quite some time, is not only storytelling but also educating, and to be in a place where you feel like you're allowed to educate others. You yourself have to be as educated and as knowledgeable about as wide a breadth of subjects as possible. I don't feel like I'm an expert necessarily in anything. I just feel like I know enough about a lot of things.
Okay. What made you, where in your journey does DJ Booth begin?
I'll give you the Cliff Notes version.
Of course.
I did basketball and baseball in high school. I knew I was never going to be a serious athlete. I'm a white Jewish kid who grew up just outside Chicago, and it was for fun. One weekend was playing tackle football at the park, blew out my knee, LCL, MCL, fractured kneecap, dislocated the knee. I had to quit basketball and baseball, which was the best thing that ever happened. In hindsight, at the time, obviously, my 16-year-old mind was crushed.
Yeah.
I ended up doing public speaking, television, and debate in high school. Went to college for mass communication, broadcast journalism. And then when I was in school, I immediately got involved in radio, and I did a Saturday night mix show at Illinois State University, and they would send me vinyl and free music, and I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. So they'd send 2 copies, one for the station, one for me. And by my junior year, I started interviewing artists and producers. No one at the station at the university had ever incorporated pre-taped interviews into the radio shows. Okay. We got nominated for some awards. I got a really big head. I thought I was the shit. And I thought, I'm going to be on the radio. While I was finishing up school, I was sending out CDs with my air check tapes. And I thought, this takes too many steps, right? You have to like mail it out. They have to open it. They have to take the CD out of the jewel case, got to put the CD in the CD player. This was around the time where like YouTube was only cat videos. So like just to give people an idea of how far back this is. And so I tried to build a website on my own. Failed miserably. Went to the library, checked out a book like How to Build Websites for Dummies. Couldn't do it. So I hit up the person who turned out to be my business partner, Dave Mackley, who had built DJ Booth as a hobby/project when he was in college himself. It was DJ only, DJ oriented, turntable mixer, headphone reviews, DJ playlists, tutorials. And I was like, give me the keys to the car. I'm going to drive this website. I'm going to put it from a niche platform into an online music magazine. At the same time, we were seeing the deterioration of the legacy brands like Source, XXL, Vibe, because they were having a hard time pivoting into the digital world from the height of physical copies. And man, I didn't know it would become anything, because at the time I didn't know you could make money on the internet. And I was only making like $50 a month. There was no money in it. But within 2 years, we actually turned a profit, and Dave quit his full-time job. And I never looked back.
What, were you just looking for someone to give you the keys, or did you look at something that was in the first iteration of DJ Booth and knew that, oh, here are the components of something really sort of special? Or was your idea ready to be ported wherever?
So at first, my mission was very self-serving. I wanted an online platform where I could write album reviews and conduct interviews and make those interviews available for stream. Because I thought that if I shared the website with people, it would give me an opportunity to get back into radio. And I always looked at DJ Booth at the beginning as a stepping stone for me personally into something bigger. And then at some point within the first 4 or 5 years of doing it, I had an epiphany. I was like, this is the thing.
What was that moment like? And I say that to say because similarly, Kids in the Hall was always the thing that was supposed to happen before the Knowledge solo album. It was never meant to be what would become the bigger brand. It was always meant to be the project that we could play around and do whatever we want with. And then when the Knowledge solo project comes, we will have set up the world. But then it just so happens that became the thing. What, if you can describe what that kind of epiphany moment was like? Because I think oftentimes people are in the midst of that and not realizing they're like, oh, I'm going to do this thing so that thing happens. But the thing that they're in the midst of is actually what they should be doing.
Well, part of it is they're too close to it. And it takes perspective that usually is not possible without years being removed from whatever it is that you're doing. For me personally, it was, I was working on DJ Booth full-time. Dave still had a full-time day job. Several years in, he quit because we realized DJ Booth could become a thing. We became an LLC. We made it official. We became business partners. I think when we probably reached something like 6 or 7 million page views a month, and we generated enough money not only to like fully support ourselves. At the time, Dave was engaged but was not married, had no children. I didn't have any financial responsibilities. So when you're operating on your own, you could struggle a little bit longer. But at the time, we had enough financial flexibility to actually expand and hire someone and afford freelancers so that I didn't literally have to do everything. Yeah. That's probably the moment where like, wow, this is growing. I think also, when you start a business, traditionally, if you don't come from deep pockets, you have to go to the bank and take out a loan. Yeah. And after you do that, every decision that you make, you're always keeping in mind what you need to do in order to pay back the money.
When did you... So you guys, I assume, took out a loan?
We never did. And that's the beauty of it. So we were always operating from an investment that we were able to make from the money we generated on the platform. So we never had to make any decisions that were based around having to pay back a loan. It's a very unorthodox way of starting a business. It also changes your expectations, right? Because you sort of have none, right? The internet's the wild, wild west. We were operating in a day and age where there were no streaming platforms. Like I said, YouTube was in its infancy stage. So we were just sort of figuring it out as we went. Yeah. We're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
16 years later.
Yeah. I tell people, and I don't know if everyone believes me or not, but this is the truth in all honesty. I think adulthood is a fallacy. I truly believe that you are essentially your younger self with an ill-fitting adult suit on that slowly gets tailored as you're making certain decisions through the world and fits a little bit better. But a lot of, in order to get there, is battling whatever your young mind's initial reaction or initial sort of decisions would make. You're like, no, I'm not. I would make a silly decision like that now or whatever. But you still are. There is no time when you become a person that is an adult version of the child version other than decision making, essentially. And so understanding, I guess, that the radio dream was not what was going to be, and DJ Booth was the double down is the adult decision.
I had tasted radio just long enough to know that while it was what I thought I wanted and what I actually went to school for and got a degree in, that me not pursuing it any further at that point wouldn't be a failure. Okay. Had I not had DJ Booth at the time that I felt that way, I might have felt differently. But, like I said before, it was supposed to be the bridge to something back into exactly what I thought I wanted to do. Yeah. And that never materialized. And over time, that just the sentiment went away completely. Okay. That somehow, this wasn't the plan. Plans change.
Yeah. So there was never a grieving process in any way because you were attached to that idea as like, this is who I am. This is my identity as a disc jockey.
Well, let me tell you, My father has been in the insurance business for 35 plus years. And growing up, we used to talk and he'd be like, I don't care what you do, just don't go into insurance, right?
Yeah.
I just want you to be happy. So, first of all, I was operating knowing whatever I wanted to do. And I knew it had to be creative somehow, that I didn't have the pressure of my parents telling me, well, you need to do this or that, or we're going to look at you differently, or you're not going to be a success.
Yeah.
So that alleviated some stress that might have existed when I told my parents, yeah, so I'm going to actually run this website. How much money are you making every month? Like $50. And every month it went from 50 to like 100 and then 150, but still that's not enough money to live off of. That's not even enough money to pay one bill a month.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, I think I definitely recall taking my parents out for a meal the first time I made like $1,500 in a month, which, again, very difficult to live off of that. Yeah. But at the time, it felt like a milestone, knowing at one point we were only making 50.
How much, this is a bit of more of a business question.
Yeah.
But especially since you guys said it took you guys a while to sort of settle into like, oh yeah, we should be LLC and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Now. Early on, how were you deciding how the money gets divvied up, being that you were kind of really going hard at it full time and then your partner had his own job, so he wasn't worried about the money, and then you still need to reinvest into the business.
Right.
How are you figuring that
trust, man? I mean, I honestly only communicated with Dave through email and phone for 2 years. And every month he'd PayPal me money. I mean, there's just a trust. Because he had a full-time job and this was my full-time job, all the money that we were making at the time after our bills were paid, he would give me.
Okay.
And then at a point in time where he was like, I think we have enough for Z to get paid in full and me to pay myself in full, he made the jump.
So, but how much were you putting back anything into marketing or anything like that at the time? So It was only just maintenance of the site, covering those sort of bills, and then whatever was left.
Hosting costs, server costs, domain name re-registration, and then all the small legal fees that come with incorporation and all that. But yeah, I mean, at the time, it didn't really cost much to keep the site up and running because it was mostly human cost. Yeah. And there was only one full-time human who costs anything.
And so if you weren't doing it monetarily, then you had to be doing it with your time. So what were you doing then to market the site early on?
Honestly, we were so early in the stream game that the site almost marketed itself. It's crazy when I tell people this because they don't believe me, but from 2006 to like 2012, which is the rise of and peak of the blog era, we spent $0 on advertising.
Wow.
Zero.
Yeah.
And we, I think, capped out at the height of that time at like 8.5 million page views. The game changed obviously over the past 8 years as far as where people go to both listen to and discover music. Mm-hmm. And it went away from the blogs and into the streaming space. But yeah, I think our filtered curation of singles and albums, and then just enough editorial context provided was the differentiation between DJ Booth and so many of the other competitors in our space, who was like picture, one sentence of text, embed. Yeah. When there were embeds. Before that, it was like Zippy Share and Z Share links.
Good old Z Share and Rapid Share.
Yeah, and Mega Upload and
speaking of the editorial content,
I
think most people would know you guys for having these sometimes controversial but deep dives into conversations that are happening in and around the culture. And it, from the outside looking in, it felt like it was and I guess we've talked about this a little bit, but it felt, not on the podcast, but it felt like a very specific move to go more long form, more evergreen. When did you feel like that needed to happen rather than playing we have a new album review that everybody else has an album review, or we have the same link that everyone else is posting, and even if we have an extra paragraph of it, it's still the same YouTube link for a new music video.
Right.
When does that shift happen?
So about 2015, as Spotify was gaining success internationally and they were going to come over to the United States, I mean, obviously at the time there was no Apple Music or Tidal, and Amazon didn't have its own service, but we saw the change winds happening. At that time, the most popular section of DJ Booth was our track section, where we filtered the best new music, featured it, and wrote about it. We could have continued just to do that. That was our biggest moneymaker in terms of page view and revenue generation. But we knew that at some point it was going to be too late to pivot. And so we actually changed before I wanted to. Dave was like, again, at the time, AudioMac had been birthed 3 years prior. So we had the data from AudioMac on our side to bolster the position that let's get out of doing this thing while we're still making money doing this thing before it's too late to do something unique and different. And I'm glad that we did, because all of the other individuals and blogs who were in our space at that time, they just kept on posting tracks with no context, not much substance. And, unfortunately, many of them did die out. Our approach, even since 2015, when we decided to go super long form, deep dives, op-eds, guest editorials, we've pivoted several times since then.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, the core tenets of the DJ Booth editorial approach are storytelling, education, artist discovery. Even over the last 6 months, we have decidedly and drastically reduced the number of op-eds and reviews that we've run. Okay. Because, again, everybody's covering the same subjects.
Yeah. And it's a much broader spectrum now, because it's New York Times talking about stuff. It's Huffington Post,
right.
It's not simply just the hip hop blogs kind of in the space anymore.
The other part of it too is, and I'm cognizant of this, is there are very few, if any, destination websites left, right? Certainly none in the music space. I mean, obviously Google and Facebook, who also ironically take up 90% of the ad market on the internet. But you now just scroll your social media of choice until you see something that you like. And there's no loyalty to any one platform. It's not like the bookmark era where you logged onto your family computer and you ran through like your 10 favorite websites every day to see what they posted that's new. So like our editorial strategy had to change just in terms of volume. Yeah. At one point we were running, 30 pieces a week, which is still small compared to like Complex, who might run 40 pieces in a day. But now we're only running about 12 to 15 a week. That's 3 to 4 a day. Yeah. So we believe in quality over quantity. People are already being inundated with enough on their timelines. Instead of trying to add lots and hope a few of those pieces hit, let's just give them a few and hope they win.
Yeah, and I'm sure that now with all the data that exists and having these very specific articles wrapped in these links, you get to really sort of see, because I assume that like, I don't actually know if you can, well, I'm assuming you can measure this to see how many things are coming in directly from those links versus someone actually checking DJ Booth to see,
The majority of our traffic is through search.
Yeah.
So that requires great headlines, good SEO, hitting on all your keywords, nailing your metadata, and mastering all these important yet ancillary items sort of takes away the fun of creating the actual content, because you could write and publish the best editorial in the world, but if you don't use the right headline and use the right keywords and nail the SEO, no one's going to find it. No one's going to read it. And I know artists can commiserate with that, because you can write, record, and release the best record ever. And unless the algorithm picks it up or it gets playlisted and you don't have a huge fan base, no one's going to hear it.
Yeah, it's something that I get to be punched in the face twice now, not simply from putting records out, but also in the podcast space. Because they're just like, everything is... Yeah, it doesn't matter if the conversation is quality. It doesn't matter if the music's quality. Nope. You have to get people in to even know it exists.
Yeah.
And that is, hopefully playing that little bit of game when the content is quality, because I've had some conversations where people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. But I do think it's still at
What
the
doesn't
end,
matter?
the quality of the content versus marketing,
Right.
touch points. I still think that if someone comes and they press play and you've gotten them with the cool, headline, and it's just shit, they're not staying. And they
probably won't come back.
yeah.
Or they'll think twice before clicking, the next time. I think, a pain point for me is when someone will come over from Twitter, since Facebook and Instagram don't drive any traffic.
Really?
None. Instagram has never driven any traffic.
Do you run no ads on Facebook?
It's a waste of money.
Okay.
The amount of money that you'd have to spend to boost content on Facebook, never in a million years would you actually make it back in revenue through their monetization program. And even if you had it redirect to your website, again, just not enough. So, it would be a loss leader, but at this point, it's not even worth the effort to program the boost campaigns. But back to how people are finding the content and absorbing it. You look at, we get an analytical pie chart through Google. And so it'll break down where you're getting the traffic from and how long people are staying on the page based on where they came from. And so the time on site from someone who comes over from social media is like half of what it is from someone who finds the article through searching on Google or any browser. Our average time on site for a feature article from a Google search is over 7 minutes, which is insane.
Yeah.
On social media, Twitter specifically, it's like 3 and some change, 3.5.
Wow.
And it's because people are so enamored with being in the know and part of the conversation that even though Twitter lets you open up their internal browser to read, the idea that you can't simultaneously be reading and tweeting bothers people.
Yeah.
And the idea of clicking a link and then waiting for the next screen to pop up and then having to go back to your timeline is insanely more work than people are willing to do.
Are we going to solve a Twitter programming problem by having them create a dual screen on the pop-up?
Twitter has enough issues that this one is not chief among them.
Yeah.
Just give us a fucking edit button already. All right. We don't want stories. Give us the goddamn edit button.
Exactly.
And there's so many ways around how they could do that without them worrying about tweeting something and then getting all this engagement and then an hour later changing it, and making it look bad. But yeah, everyone who complains about like the journalists and state of journalism and music journalism, I don't blame them for feeling that way. If I wasn't a part of the industry, I would feel the exact same way. But there's such a lack of understanding and knowledge about what is going on in this space. And it's hard for me to believe people are that naive when every week you see publications shuttering, journalists, copy editors, producers losing their jobs. So many of the people I came into this business with, they're doing like my dad does. They're selling insurance.
Yeah.
So artists especially should commiserate because they get it.
Yeah, I think this is where I often push back or I have issues with. It feels like for a while, and even now, and it's not every journalist, but they are sometimes 1 foot in and 1 foot out as it relates to the culture.
I agree 100%.
And so, yes, they have another master to serve, right? But then there's this cultural sort of master that always exists. And I understand everybody has to pay bills, everybody has to do those sort of things. But when it comes at the expense of protecting, let's say, the culture in a certain way, and the articles become exploitative because they are clickbaity, then it makes the scenario, which has always been slightly adversarial, right? A whole lot more, because it's just like, are you part of the family? Are you down with this thing that we call hip hop? Are you a part of this thing, or are you just trying to profit on it or maintain your your position at that company by pulling from it when you need to, rather than putting anything back in?
Right.
And artists don't necessarily have the ability to do that because they are so attached to the culture, right? Like they aren't like other music genres, and they aren't even like an actor who can play something and then leave it there. It's like, oh no, you didn't, like you are directly tied to that lineage, even if they don't even know that they are. How many artists have been attached to like, oh, you sound like so-and-so, and you're like, I never heard of that, but they're immediately going to get attached to the long line and the lineage, and they have to carry that backpack on their back to the next sort of stage. And sometimes the ancillary members of it, and often the journalists, it feels like they're playing this weird dance, and you don't necessarily want to trust, and sometimes can't trust, that some of them are going to choose that over the other foot, I guess, the larger sort of corporation and writing things. Then there's something I was talking with Jason Rodriguez with last week, is like there's also a different training that many journalists have received, especially if they've actually gone to journalism school, that the way in which they need to press and expose or dig the story is antithetical to, let's say, what the artist or whoever may want to present. And that's kind of where the rub always happens. So I'd love to say like, yeah, we got to support each other, but there's always going to be, I feel like, this weird rub because of that. And then the fact that there are a ton of very novice journalists and a ton of ton of unseasoned artists in terms of media training, but those two things have also added to spoiling the game, because now you have people who are a little bit slightly more talented than your Twitter egg, writing full articles that go viral about something because they just feel like, they have a clever way of wording a title, but it, again, doesn't serve the larger sort of goal.
I mean, I agree with almost everything that you said. There's a lot of levels to all of these things that need to be considered. And everything, I'm going to parse my words very carefully. Everything I'm about to say, none of it is an excuse.
Yeah.
It's more so an explanation, just to play devil's advocate, to understand from the other side. So first, critics and their subjects, there requires tension, as you alluded to. They shouldn't be friends. And there's been too much access journalism over the past 10 years that has prevented a lot of necessary cultural criticism from being levied because of the inherent fear, well, if I go too hard at this person, I'm not going to be invited to their album release party, or they're not going to get me backstage at the next show. So that's something that has been a battle in our space. So back before the internet, you used to get a job at a magazine or a newspaper. You'd work under someone's tutelage in a beat or on a column that barely anybody read.
Right.
But that was your warm-up. That was the opportunity that you had to practice before you were given an opportunity to be published and get recognition in a dominant space with quality real estate or eyeballs, or in the newspaper game, they used to say above the fold. That went away because the traditional journalism jobs went away.
Yeah.
So you had all these kids who were graduating from journalism school who basically went into these blog roles where they were told, you need to create 40 pieces of content a week. Very little editorial oversight, and they had to basically learn on their own. I mean, our senior writer, Yo Phillips, he didn't go to school for journalism. He was writing for fun while working and serving at Olive Garden, and just stumbled into what has been a prosperous and acclaimed journalism career. Yeah. So there is no necessarily one right path. I think what people need to understand about the framing of articles is back in the day when you used to read a newspaper, everything had a particular place. And so opposite the news column would be the opinion column. And clearly defined above the headlines for each, it would specifically and explicitly say news, opinion, guest editorial. So before you started reading the piece, your entry point, you knew what to expect. All right, this author is going to share their opinion and then back it up. This story is a news story, completely unbiased. They're just telling me facts. Because we're now getting all of our content through social media, our tweets don't necessarily always come with an indicator of what you're about to read. Yeah. And everybody assumes that everything is news, even if it's presented as an op-ed. And so you start reading, assuming it's news. And then once the author shares their opinion, well, oh my God, they're biased. But here's the rub. If it's supposed to be an op-ed, bias is required.
Yeah,
that's what makes it an op-ed.
Yeah.
And so all of this is a lack of understanding, but it's also part of the ecosystem in which we're absorbing and getting our content, how our content is being disseminated, and the fact that a lot of unqualified people were forced to grow up in their field quicker than they should have, put in positions that they were not qualified for. And it's created this firestorm in which clickbait-esque headlines are used to pull people in. My stance on clickbait, in quotation marks, is this. If people knew how hard it was to get people to click through to read, they'd understand better, so long as what they actually read once they got to the platform matched the headline. It's when you are led to believe you're going to get something, and then after you've actually read it, you realize this is not, I was sold a bag of goods that I did not buy. That's the difference.
Yeah, I think my biggest gripe with it is in the rush to be
first.
Yep. What ends up happening is your 30-second opinion on a song, a project, in the first hour doesn't get to settle. You're not taking the pause to really, and you're bringing in whatever you have and feel about that artist before that, but you're just required to write that article. And so these articles get written that are often just very purposely heavily, there's no getting way around it, like super skewed about everything, let's say, but the music. Because no one is allowed the weekend to write an article, right? Songs come out, albums come out on Friday, reviews come out on Friday. And so sometimes my issue is just like, oh, you didn't even like really listen to this. Like you didn't have a chance to listen to it. And obviously, that's just the artist in me always, feeling a way about how people review my music.
I get it.
Then there is also now, I think we are so inundated by so much information. There's this thing with therapy, right? Where you get to a certain point and you realize that if you build out any sort of other spiritual self-care practices, right, that continuing to talk about the same exact thing in therapy every week is not serving you because you're keeping it extremely present. And you need space and not disassociation, but separation from that thing in order to move forward in any sort of way. And I think what happens now, and especially because the dopamine hits are so easy on things like Twitter, is that so many journalists, so many artists, so many fans are just plugged into this thing that any little, and this will be a perfect transition into your problems over the last week, any little thing on Twitter just snowballs into this, and then whatever is the problem du jour of the moment then gets fed into it because it's always existing. Like it's always, I was talking last week about cultural appropriation. And at first I was hesitant because I was just like, oh, this is not trying to have evergreen content. And I was like, wait a minute, it's always evergreen because there's every single week someone's being accused of the thing over and over and over and over and over and over again. And we don't move past, we're in these cycles of not moving past any of these things where they all become, it's the way in which, in our political situation right now, we're still chastising for things that are 25, 30-year-old decisions that don't get allowed to move forward. It's not like, okay, you did that, that was wrong, and now here's what you can do to solve and move forward with us. It's, oh no, you did that, you have the scarlet letter on, and now I'm done with you.
Right.
And that bleeds into all the things, especially when it comes into critical commentary about the music and the culture, because everything comes into that article. So you're like, man, I just wanted to listen to that new, Lil Baby album. But then it's
pretty
just
hard
like,
to just do that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, that's what we have to bring this thing up. And then there's this criminal thing that happened. And there's all of this sort of stuff that it never allows. In one instance, the good side, it's not just bad, right? The good side of it is, at least in the social media era, we haven't really had, surprisingly enough, that many one-hit wonders where they just disappear one day. They may, but because the way that like a song can take over, and because nothing goes away now, it's just buoyed there forever. Mm-hmm. These people are becoming these stars at this super fast speed, to this level where, oh, you can maintain this for a decade, you can maintain this for whatever. Whereas before, they would have a summer and then it'd be done.
Right.
On the other side, anything that you do that crosses the mob, or anything that you do that becomes questionable, then also stays there forever as well, and nothing gets moved forward. And I just feel like it taints a lot of the conversations in journalism, because these things are consistently being brought up, and nobody is allowed either redemption, or no subject can be talked about without like, oh yeah, and then there are these 5 other things from 6 years ago.
Right.
And I don't know how, I guess, fair it is, and I don't know how even progressive it is for us to continue to do that.
Well, it's not fair, but life is not fair.
Of course.
So, I mean,
of course,
it's part and parcel with everything else.
Of course. Speaking of life not being fair, you got yourself into some shit this past week, trying to be good. So Megan Thee Stallion decided to go public with a label dispute, contract dispute, and you jumped in with, I guess, what would be not necessarily anything too bad, but the basic, like, I don't know how many times I have to hear the story from young artists to kind of say, get a lawyer.
Pretty much.
In an effort to be, it turned into some shit. I'm assuming some people probably hit you behind the scenes. I don't know if they did or not. And at a certain point, you obviously kind of apologize for the wording of it. But to talk about the subject a little bit, now that we've seen the contract, now that she's been able to sue, now that Jay Prince has had his 2 words, in your opinion, what is a good contract for an artist?
Well, it's a broad question.
Sure.
And the short answer is it depends where you're at in your career. Over the past 5 years, A&R costs have gone up, both at independent and major labels. And by A&R costs, I don't just mean like the actual physical human beings being hired by the labels, but also the amount of money being pumped into marketing those artists and developing those artists. Now, granted, artist development and incubation is a lost art today, because when something pops, the label needs to push it hard and fast immediately.
But there's a ton of money that goes into pushing that thing.
A ton of money.
Yeah.
And, like, for instance, with Megan's situation, I read everything. I read the temporary restraining order. I read her original contract. Everybody jumped to assume that it was a terrible deal. The one thing that we don't have confirmation on yet, other than Carl Crawford admitting in an interview to Billboard that he's spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in marketing her, is it takes a lot of money to break an artist. Now, setting aside whether you think her contract is good or bad, whether the advance of $10,000 was paltry, whether the 60-40 split was good, whether someone in Carl's position should be administering her publishing and overseeing her master ownership, which I think is a huge no-no for one person to control both at the very beginning of your career. Setting all of that aside, Megan wouldn't be in the position she is in today, where she has a deal with 300 for distribution, which goes through Warner, and a management deal with Rock Nation, and making $100,000 a show and booked on every festival if they're allowed to happen this summer.
Yeah.
If she didn't have an investment from a label.
Yeah.
So if you sign the deal, it could still be bad, but you signed it. So for you at the time, it was good.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, I've been sued by management before, and I can get into that. But I think, and the record business has never not been an exploitation business. There is no scenario, if you were to compare it to anything else, startup with VC relationship, or a bakery and a banker, right? If you were to open a bakery, you go get a loan, you get that, you have to pay back that loan, right? Maybe they get a percentage. They're not really getting a percentage of it, but let's say you have an investor. You're paying back their thing, and then they get a percentage of the company.
Correct.
Right? But both of you guys are essentially incurring whatever it is until you guys see profitability, right? Whatever that investment is. From day one, recoup has always been the devil in the details as it relates to record contracts.
Yeah.
And to me, it doesn't matter if it's 60-40, if it's 50-50, if it's, 10-90. There's something that is in every record contract that if someone gives you a $10,000 advance, $100,000 advance, it still is on your percentage to make not just that $10,000 back, but whatever hidden costs are coming in from the marketing side that label has to do in order to break you. Right? And that is, to me, where if you're going to be in the music industry, that is probably going to be a reality. It's very rare that it's not. You have scenarios like 50 Cent or Bump J, where they signed that they got $1 million up front, non-recoup sort of scenario. Where that is just a part of the business until you get to a point where it doesn't have to be anymore.
Well, operating in any business, you need to be able to understand what the other side's motivation is.
Yeah.
On DJ Booth a couple weeks ago, prior to Megan's story breaking, industry veteran Wendy Day wrote a guest editorial. And it was 11 things all artists need to know when attempting to break into the record business. Keyword business. And she said, when you go to the negotiating table with your lawyer, it's important to understand that a record label wants to sign you for as little as possible, for as long a period of time as possible. And your goal is to get as much money as possible, but for as little time as possible.
Yeah.
Vince Staples, a couple years ago, signed to Def Jam. And they had offered him a larger advance that he ended up taking. And he was asked in an interview why he asked them for a smaller advance. And he said that by taking the smaller advance, it gave him more creative control, committed him to the label for a shorter period of time. And he knew that if the opportunity was there, it would be enough for him to use that for a second deal or a third deal, rather than getting locked in for a long time just to make a little bit more money up front. and he's already on a new deal with Motown. I don't know how this will pan out for Vince, but I do know that he stayed true to his original idea, which was I'll take less money for full creative control, which at a major label, you don't know that you're necessarily going to get.
Yeah.
Maybe now more than ever because of the lack of A&R development. But at the time, rapper from Long Beach, we're going to put you into this box. And Vince is a weird cat. And so he does his own thing. And Vince is one of the rare cases where an artist has publicly discussed why their label worked for them, as opposed to what is the typical narrative, which is the label did nothing good for me. The label is the devil. It's that the people who are pleased with their record contracts, and there are a lot of people who are pleased, not necessarily happy. They're not over the moon.
Yeah.
But the label's done right by them. They don't ever talk about it.
Yeah.
And those stories don't go viral.
It's the same thing when we talk about streaming, right? And there are all these people that argue and poo-poo about streaming numbers and not getting paid. And then there are the people who are making a lot of money to say nothing.
Right. Or if they do say something, it's not enough to produce a headline. It's not enough for a viral tweet.
Yeah.
And so those are not the stories that circulate. The record label has an image. The record industry, major labels have an image problem. They are cognizant that they have this image problem. They've never done anything to dispel it at all.
Yeah.
And over the past 5 years, as the way in which talent is procured and signed, their Band-Aid has just been like, let's throw a lot of money at it. My position in the tweet that I initially had sent out while I was on the way to the airport to fly to New York was there have been enough horror stories at this point that have circulated on social media for anyone in the same position to hopefully know, no matter how desperate they might be in that instance, and I'm not telling you not to do what you need to for your family, to not put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
I also understand that I'm white, and it's not necessarily about what I'm saying, but me being the deliverer of that message. What was an interesting observation that several people had made, both publicly on Twitter and privately, was that the folks who follow me and have followed me for years, I only got a public Twitter account in 2018. I stayed off Twitter for a long time. Everyone who knows me, whether in real life or online, they know my tone. They know that I'm an artist advocate. They know that we publish regularly educational content.
100%.
They know that AudioMac is an artist-first platform that truly is moving music forward with everything that we do. They know that a competitor like SoundCloud charges creatives for analytics and storage, and AudioMac offers creatives everything for free. So they know all of that, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm still white and I'm the person saying it. And part of me tries to muzzle myself at times because I never want to say anything that could in any way harm my reputation long-term, and also both of my companies. And what happened with Megan's tweet was the people in that circle who do know me, they were like, thank you, Z. And then the tweet went viral, and all the people who don't know who the fuck I am and just saw the profile photo and they're like, another white guy offering his opinion. That's when the scale was tipped.
Yeah.
Which I totally get.
Yeah. What I will say about the original tweet, though, in the, get a lawyer scenario.
Yeah.
Since I've gone through many of these weird contracts and have had lawyers. That doesn't necessarily solve.
Of course not. Of course not.
But I think, in an effort to be educational in this space, I think it's always important. Like Joe Budden just talked about this, his first contract, he was like, okay, I need to get a lawyer. And the manager was like, yeah, cool, we got one. But it's like that person's relationship is to whoever got them, not to you. And oftentimes, most lawyers, especially in selecting a lawyer, what I would say is be very cognizant of who their clients are.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there are bigger fish in the space that have relationships at a place that you're trying to negotiate a contract at, and they know that they need, let's say, the label you might sign to on their good side when they go to renegotiate a much larger person's contract, you're in a terrible position with that lawyer to get a great deal. And so I think it isn't as easy as the, get a lawyer scenario.
Of course not.
And I also think that people forget that, like, there's two things. I think artists do need to take a step back sometimes. And it's a hard thing to do. But it's this realization that if you have somebody who saw something in you early and threw hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maybe you aren't paying attention during that time, and you always should be, always keep at least a peripheral view of, like, oh, how's this video getting paid for? How's this? Because that's all money you owe, in theory. When that moves to another entity, and there isn't some large payout, right? That doesn't just get bought out. You still owe that money. There are a ton of artists that have been angry with their management contracts or with their production deals originally, because it's like, the person will be saying, I paid your rent for 2 years.
Right.
We were making sure that you had groceries in the thing. Hair and makeup costs this much. All these flights here and there cost this much. They're very clear on how much they've spent. But, the assumption for the artist, I think sometimes they play a little bit naive until it gets to a situation where it's like, oh, I won now. I'm getting the big money. Wait a minute, where's my big check? And you're like, oh, yeah, you owe $150,000 in back stuff for the last 4 years that we've supported your career. And I think that many artists stepping into this space need to be really cognizant. There is, especially starting from zero. If a fluke happens and all of a sudden you're famous,
Different
it's a little
story.
bit different.
Yeah.
But when you are developing from the ground up and you enter into a scenario where there's someone who's going to put up money to make that thing happen, just know that from day one, all of that is being added up.
You're indebted to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you are, and that payout may not happen when the first thing happens. When the first sort of hit happens, it may happen on the second or third one, and just being cognizant of the way that you think about your deal in that way.
Yeah.
And knowing, like, okay, something that we did was have a cap on the amount of money that could be spent before we had a conversation about whether that could be spent.
Right.
Little things like that can help you not let that train sort of run away. Where I think she is now, where that person's like, wait a minute, I'm owed hundreds of thousands of dollars, spent this money to put her in this position. And now she's trying to renegotiate before the win actually happens and everybody gets paid.
There's also the emotional element too, right?
Of course.
Because beyond just the financial investment, the ego comes into play. Like, I believed in you at a time where no one else believed in you. Yeah. And that belief was not just verbal belief, like telling you I believe in you, but I proved it by literally investing my money. And then to see her, like, leave the coop, so to speak, and flap her wings and thrive without getting any of the credit for all the work and time put in.
Yeah, because be clear, this is the first time that I've heard about this label. And I'm sure...
1501?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. And it's a shame that people are hearing about it only in this context, regardless of the bad business and the way that the transactions were done. But just imagine having a relationship with someone for a while, seeing them thrive, and then feeling like all the hard work you put in is not being recognized.
Well, I've had it happen.
So
that's why I got sued by my former manager.
And I'm not absolving Carl Crawford of any wrongdoing should this come out in court after everything is made available to us, if the contract that he actually did initially sign her to was as fugazi as I would like to believe based on what I've read so far. But yeah, there's an emotional element here. I think both parties clearly fucked up. I don't think that they were in a position to get things done in the right way. And, we talked earlier about major labels. This was like a, mom and pop shop, local Houston-based
And be clear,
record label.
This is this other than not even other than the publishing thing. This is better terms than I've seen most major label contracts.
Oh, yeah. 60/40 is great.
Yeah, 60. Like, I don't think people understand in the CD era where it was $7.25 or whatever $8 that the label would make off of a CD, you were getting less than $1 per that. Like, that's what every most major label artists that that are superstars, that are all those sort of, that are icons, sign. Mm-hmm. So this 60/40 split, I was looking at it, I was like, that's not a bad sort of like first deal.
Yeah.
Granted, what they should have also not done, to me, where it becomes a problem, because is in trying to 360 it, right?
With revenue from her touring.
From touring and from publishing.
Right.
Trying to step into this space where they're like, oh, but we also need all these other revenue streams. I think that's where it becomes a larger sort of problem. And to be honest, I mean, this is just all assumption. I think this is a Rock Nation move, why this whole conversation is even happening. Because this is to me a classic case of big bank take little bank. When you have this entity that is hanging on, that is monetarily going to benefit from something that can scale, and they're just sitting there. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to, they've invested the upfront money, but you see this windfall about to come. It's best to just get them out, especially if they have any sort of power as it relates to, like, they can veto things or say yes or say no. Clearly, they are able to say no. You're not going to be able to put records out.
Right. I think they're just going to buy out the contract. I think that's the resolution, and I think 1501 will have to settle with royalties being paid out over time.
Yeah, and that this is something that has happened over and over again.
Oh yeah,
you have to, sometimes you sign that weird first contract, and there's a point, and this is what I go back to the lawyer thing, and then we can wrap. Was like, I've managed an artist, and in her, not this last deal, but the deal before, her former management and the label said, hey, this lawyer that you have with you that has been doing stuff with you, this deal is not happening if they're still involved. Like, they're just not of the caliber to do this deal.
Right.
We don't want to negotiate across the table with this person. They just don't know. So you need to go get a big boy lawyer. But again, you do that, and their allegiances are to all their big clients.
Right.
And so it's just a really hard game to play. It's not as
it's not as black and white or cut and dry.
And it'll
as
never
a tweet
be.
would
Yeah.
indicate.
And I think you're going to always take a loss somewhere. You just have to be really cognizant of the loss. I mean, what Vince did was really smart. It's something that Remy Martin said on Breakfast Club this week, which is also like,
she got a great deal with Columbia.
Take the shortest terms possible.
Yeah.
And if you can take less money for more control.
Yep.
And yeah, but I'm just going to leave you with one last question.
Okay.
This is the thing that I've been doing now. What is something that you've learned from hip hop that you use in your everyday life? That could be being a father, family man. That could be running the company, anything.
I mean, admittedly, I'm going to turn 36 in April. And, as much as I have always loved hip hop culture, I definitely don't connect with as much music being released now as I used to. Part of that is, unfortunately, because it became a job for me, it sort of sucks some of the enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, from a cultural standpoint, what is something that you've learned having been in it, kicking it with your friends, whatever it is, in this world that we call hip hop, that you apply outside of it?
I think just the joy that I associate with listening to hip hop from when I was a kid, and being able to then extend that to being a father now with a child. again, at the time I was young, my parents didn't play hip hop for me, but they did expose me to music. And so now being able to do that same thing with my daughter has been a very cool 360 for me.
Do you have a stash of like I can't wait to play you these joints?
Well, if my wife is around, she tells me otherwise, but I do have edited music.
Yeah.
And that's in between listening to frozen music
Of course.
over and over and over again. But I think, music is the international language. And for a long time, the only music language that I spoke was hip hop. And being able to share that with a child of my own has been very special. As she gets older and my wife unshackles me from her restrictions, I hope to expose her to more. But yeah, I mean, it's weird working in music, having grown up as a fan, because candidly, it has taken away some of the pure passion that I have for it, because it's part of the job, and I fight that constantly.
Yeah.
But if I didn't love what I do, I certainly wouldn't put in 65 to 80 hours a week, and travel all over the place to do it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for your time, man.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I was worried you were going to pepper me with some really hard questions, but
No. I didn't. I tried not to go. We're good.
thank you, Mike.
Once again, thank you to my guest. And make sure you follow at Think Like a Rapper on Instagram, and check the video for the podcast out on the YouTube channel for Kids in the Hall. KIDZINTHEHALL.